January 14th, 1943. The bitter wind carved its way across the frozen plains of eastern Poland as a lone Wehrmacht truck pushed through the abandoned countryside, its tires grinding into snow packed hard by weeks of relentless winter. Inside the rear cabin, Corporal Erich Klausner sat hunched against the wooden wall, hands buried deep inside his gloves, trying to protect himself from the chill that slipped through every seam of his uniform. The Eastern Front had reduced countless men to shadows, hungry, exhausted, and numb to the horror spreading across villages that, once full of families, now stood silent like graveyards denied even the dignity of tombstones. The truck slowed as it approached a small cluster of wooden homes, most half-collapsed, roofs caved in by fire or mortar, or simply the weight of snow that no one remained alive to clear. The smell of burnt timber hung like a ghost in the air. Klausner lifted his head, eyes narrowing as he saw the charred remains of wagons, broken furniture, and faint traces of footsteps that would soon vanish under fresh snowfall. A day earlier, SS troops had come through this village. Soldiers in the Wehrmacht heard the screams, but no one moved. Orders were clear. No one interfered with SS work. No one asked questions. No one disobeyed. But as the truck sputtered to a halt, something pierced the silence. A cry, thin, trembling, barely audible, yet distinct enough to freeze Klausner's breath in his throat. He stepped down from the truck, boots crunching into snow stained with soot, ash, and darker things better left unnamed. His rifle hung loosely at his side, almost forgotten as he followed the sound between the blackened remains of two homes. The village felt deserted, as though time itself had fled. The cry came again. He pushed open the sagging door of a ruined house. A gust of icy wind swept through the skeletal beams. Inside, under a broken table and wrapped in a soot-covered blanket, lay an infant. Her cheeks were bright red from cold, her breath shallow, her tiny fists trembling. Klausner stood frozen. He knew what had happened here. The SS rarely missed survivors. If a baby was alive, it was not by mercy, it was by accident. He felt his heartbeat rising in his chest, louder than the crack of the wind outside. Another soldier called from the truck. "Klausner, find anything." He hesitated. Seconds stretched. Then he answered. "Nothing. Just rubble." His voice shook slightly, but the wind swallowed it. Turning back to the infant, he crouched slowly. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with terror no child should ever know. When he lifted her carefully, she was weightless, too light, too cold, too fragile. Yet in that moment, she felt heavier than his rifle, heavier than every order he had been given, heavier than the war itself. He tucked her inside his coat, close to his chest, feeling her faint warmth. She made a soft noise, one that seemed to anchor itself inside him. He stepped out of the ruins and walked back toward the truck. Snowflakes blew around him like falling ash. No one questioned him. Men were too tired to care about anything beyond food and rest. He returned to the camp without speaking another word. Inside the barracks, he slipped toward his bunk, heart pounding with each step. He loosened the floorboards beneath it, creating a shallow space, just wide enough to hide the child. He wrapped her in a wool cloth he had stolen weeks earlier from abandoned civilian homes, then slid her gently inside the cavity. Throughout the night, while soldiers cursed the cold and argued about ration shortages, Klausner stayed awake. He fed the baby drops of water from a tin cup and tiny pieces of softened bread. Every sound she made forced him to tense, eyes darting toward the door. But exhaustion blanketed the room, and no one noticed. The next morning, the challenge began. Keeping an infant alive in a military encampment was not simply dangerous, it was suicide. A Jewish child found in the possession of a German soldier meant immediate execution. No trial, no second chances. Klausner lived each day balancing on the edge of discovery. Yet every time he lifted the floorboard and saw the baby's eyes, something deep inside him shifted. A fragment of the boy he once was, raised by a gentle mother who believed kindness was a duty, resurfaced through the layers of indoctrination and uniform. Days passed. Nights grew longer. The camp froze around them. He carved out a careful routine. At dawn, before the others stirred, he checked on the baby, fed her whatever scraps he could find, whispered to her in a soft voice he barely recognized as his own. She clung to his thumb with surprising strength for someone so small. Sometimes he feared the soldiers would hear her, but luck remained on his side. Most men returned from patrol too exhausted to notice anything beyond their blankets and bread rations. The danger intensified when Sergeant Weber began observing Klausner more closely. Weber was a veteran with sharp instincts dulled only by vodka. One night, he approached him abruptly. "You're jumpy," Weber muttered. "What are you hiding?" Klausner tried to maintain composure. "Nothing, Herr Sergeant. I'm just tired like everyone else." Weber stared a moment longer, then grunted. "Stay focused. The Russians are pushing harder." He walked off, leaving Klausner drenched in cold sweat. Every day after that felt like borrowed time. Then came the order that nearly broke him. Their unit was to provide support to an SS operation at a nearby transit camp. This meant inspections, barracks, personal belongings, everything. The baby would be found. There was no way around it. That night, Klausner made a choice he knew he could never undo. He opened the floorboard, lifted the baby into his arms, and stared at her tiny face illuminated by the dim lantern. She blinked slowly, oblivious to the mortal danger surrounding them. "I can't let them take you," he whispered. He wrapped her in his coat, tucked a pouch of bread into his belt, and stepped outside into the ruthless winter. He was no longer a soldier of the Reich. He was a fugitive, carrying the most fragile secret of his life. Snow fell relentlessly as he walked deeper into the woods, boots sinking, breath coming in painful bursts. The cold bit fast. His hands numbed, his vision blurred. Yet he pressed forward, listening for patrols, praying silently that his footprints would vanish beneath fresh snowfall before the morning sun. Hours later, distant shouts confirmed his worst fear. Soldiers were tracking him. He pressed the baby closer, whispering shakily, "Hold on, please." By dawn, he was nearly collapsing. His legs trembled uncontrollably. The baby's breathing had weakened. Panic clawed at his chest. Then he heard it, faint movement behind a line of trees. Not soldiers. Softer, human but cautious. A man emerged in ragged clothes, holding a makeshift rifle. His eyes were sharp with fear, anger, and hunger. The eyes of someone who had lost everything. Klausner raised a hand slowly. I have something." He opened his coat, revealing the infant. The man's expression changed instantly. Disbelief, shock, confusion, and then something achingly human. The man signaled for him to follow. Through tangled thickets and over frozen ground, they reached a half-collapsed farmhouse. A hidden latch opened to a narrow cellar. Inside were 10 survivors, elderly parents, a few women, 2 children, a teenager with hollow eyes. Horrified gasps filled the cellar when they saw the German uniform. But when he gently placed the baby into an elderly woman's arms, silence overcame fear. The woman's eyes glistened. She held the child with a tenderness that defied the brutality outside. A younger man stepped forward. "Why would a German bring a Jewish baby here?" Klausner swallowed hard, unsure how to explain something he barely understood himself. "Because she was alive," he said quietly, "and she needed someone." There were no cheers, no applause, only the slow thawing of disbelief. "You cannot stay," the bearded man whispered. "If they follow you here, we all die." Klausner nodded. He knew. Before he left, the elderly woman approached, placing a frail hand on his sleeve. She said only 4 words. "You saved her life." He lowered his head, unable to speak, then stepped back into the storm. For days he wandered, surviving on melted snow and bits of stale bread. He was captured not by Germans, but by a Polish resistance group. They debated killing him, but saw he had no weapon, no fight left. They forced him into labor instead. When Soviet forces advanced, lines blurred. Soldiers, prisoners, civilians, all scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Klausner shed his uniform and name. He drifted through refugee camps until he reached Austria after the war. There, he adopted a new identity and became a carpenter. Neighbors described him as decent, quiet, and painfully lonely. Inside a small wooden box he crafted, he kept a single fragment of soot-stained blanket, the only reminder of the child who had once clung to him in a world gone mad. Half a century passed. The baby he saved grew up in France, adopted by survivors. Named Miriam Hirsch, she became a teacher. Yet she always carried a hole in her identity, a mystery about how she survived the massacre that claimed her family. In the early 1990s, she began searching for the truth. Old testimony surfaced. One man, once hidden in the cellar, recounted a miraculous event: a young German soldier who had appeared with a baby wrapped in his coat. He didn't know the soldier's name, only that he disappeared into the blizzard. In 1993, a small Austrian newspaper published a story about an elderly carpenter who had died alone. In his belongings was a wooden box containing nothing but a torn baby blanket and a note: "For das Kind. Ich hoffe, du hast gelebt." For the child, I hope you lived. The article reached a Holocaust documentation center in France. They contacted Miriam. Days later, she traveled to Austria and held the blanket, the first object connecting her to the beginning of her life. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that a man she never met had saved her at the cost of his country, his future, and his identity. Through fragments of local records, testimonies, and the age of the deceased carpenter, she confirmed his name: Corporal Erich Klausner. She visited his grave, a small, weathered stone tucked near the cemetery wall. Kneeling, she placed a newly woven baby blanket atop the grave, not as a replacement, as a completion, a bridge across 5 decades, a thank you that history almost buried. In the enormity of World War II, a conflict that reshaped continents, consumed millions, and left behind ruins of unimaginable scale, the smallest stories often reveal the deepest truths. Humanity survives not only in victories or treaties, but in moments of compassion that defy hatred. A soldier shaped by propaganda, a child condemned by genocide, a decision made in a frozen village that changed 2 lives forever. Erich Klausner vanished from the world for 50 years, but the life he saved did not. And in the end, that single act of courage outlasted the empire he once served, the war that broke him, and the silence he carried to his grave.